a show on KPFA. Now it's working. I have a show called Voices of the Middle East and North Africa on KPFA radio. And I've been asked to do this thing with Mona and Maysa, two great authors who produced really beautiful books recently. I'm going to be presenting to you. Please read the... So there'll be a signing session right after this presentation at the end, and it'll be in that room, I think, over there. So that's important. It's also good to know that 95% of the funding is nonprofit. So if you can, help support the Bay Area Book Festival in any way that you can, probably by buying books, that would be a good idea. To keep this wonderful festival going in the future. So first I'll briefly introduce both of our panelists here. And then we'll just have a conversation, the three of us, and at the end of that, we'll ask if there are any questions. We'll be happy to answer those. My guest to the left, the farthest left is Mona Damluji, who grew up on the other side of the world from places that her ancestors called home. Yet, thanks to her parents and grandparents, she has always felt a deep attachment to her Iraqi and Lebanese roots. As a student, Mona moved around quite a bit, calling many places home, from Beirut to Boston, Berkeley, London, and China. Today she lives in Santa Barbara, California, where she works as a college professor in film and media studies. When Mona is not hanging out with her kids, she's likely teaching, writing, organizing poetry readings, or dreaming of creative projects. My second guest is Maysa Odeh, who wrote, I forgot to mention the name of your book. Let's show the title. I want you to know. My second guest is Maysa Odeh, who wrote this book called A Map For Falasteen, which we had a conversation on radio a couple of days ago about. It's a fascinating book that presents a little girl asking a very pertinent question these days. Why is there not a map for Palestine, for Palestine? Her name is Palestine. And introduce yourself, will you, for me. I don't have the blurb that I had on you, so please give us a short introduction of yourself.
Hi everybody, I'm Maysa Odeh. I'm a Palestinian writer based in California and Palestinian in exile. I grew up between the US and Amman, Jordan, and this is my debut children's book, which I never thought I would write, but you know how having kids brings really interesting things out of you. I wrote this book in the summer of 2021. And I was in a state of grief when I wrote it, and it was my way of coping with that state. It was I was witnessing one of many attacks on Gaza at that time, and seeing it as a mom really shook me in a new way, and I felt like I had to do something. I couldn't believe that I was still witnessing it, and that I would have to now explain it to my daughter, explain the occupation, something that's so ugly and so hard to describe. And so I set out to write this book in a way that was gentle and honest and appropriate for a child. To kind of make Palestinian kids feel loved, and to humanize them for an American audience that unfortunately consumes a lot of information that dehumanizes the Palestinian child. We talk about representation so much in books in the kid-lit world, and for Palestinian kids, we're not even at the point of representation. I feel like we're still dealing with the dehumanization, and once we get out of that and we get to baseline with everyone else, then we can start to talk about representation a little bit. So that's a little background on what inspired this story.
Sorry, I forgot to ask you first a little bit about your background. It's obvious you're Palestinian American, but tell us a little bit about the trajectory, when your parents came here, or your grandparents, and that sort of thing. So personal information, then we'll go to the book itself.
Okay. Oh, do I have to? I don't like. I'm not used to this. So it's a long, convoluted story. My parents are both from Hawara, which is in the West Bank in Palestine, and they grew up as neighbors that didn't know much about one another. And then in '67, my mom's family had to leave on foot to go to Jordan, so they walked to Jordan. My dad's family did the same, but they had the luxury of a taxi. They didn't have to walk on foot. They left everything behind. And my dad went from Jordan to Iraq to Kuwait. My mom stayed in a camp in Jordan. And eventually, when my dad was of marrying age, they were like, remember so-and-so? Well, they have a really beautiful daughter. And they reunited in Jordan. How did we end up in California? My father, traditional fallah, not only did he grow up tending to olive trees, peasant, he studied agriculture in Iraq, in Baghdad, and came here to work for a seed company in California. So that's how we ended up in California. Yeah.
You were born in
I was born in Philadelphia. Yeah, I was born here. But I've been to Palestine. I just haven't had the luxury of living there.
So there's one passage I was thinking maybe we'll do that for both books, but when we're on the subject of Palestine or Falasteen or both, one of the things I liked about the book is the little kid, herself is named after Palestine. And you never actually stated, but it's pretty obvious for at least Arab speakers, it's obvious, and probably for others too. Palestine.
Sometimes they know, sometimes not.
So your little, the main character, the little girl, spends the entire book, she asks first her teacher, and then her grandparents, her parents, how come there's no map for Palestine? Where is it? What happened? She's asking naively and honestly. And at some point, her mother answers that question. I found that really touching, the way the mother answered the question. Would you read that passage for us, Maysa?
I'd love to.
Very poetic and very poignant, I thought. Yes, it's a good idea to show the drawings, although it's from a distance. The graphics are really beautiful. I mean, it's stunning.
Yeah, you did a beautiful job. So, this is after asking all of her family members. She goes to her mom last. Finally, she asked one more time, for Mama had an answer to every question. Mama, why isn't Palestine on the map? There are places, Hayati, you don't need a map to find, her mama said. Our favorite trail, your hideout in Teta's closet, the bird's nest inside our chimney. Sometimes people live in countries. Sometimes countries live in people. Palestine lives in you and me. How can I be sure it's there when I've never seen it? There are things in this world you haven't seen with your own eyes, Mama said. Your heart in your chest, the air in your lungs. From her olive groves to the sea, our homeland is as real as God above. Palestine lives in you and me.
Thank you. And how appropriate and how timely, unfortunately, what's going on out there. We're all, I'm sure all of us, just daily being shocked and traumatized by what's going on there, even though it's largely swept under the rug. Still, it penetrates. And it's just shocking. I've never seen anything like it. I've been around for a while. The word genocide is just not being pronounced in this context, as if somehow magically what we're witnessing has nothing to do with genocide. Speaking of this really traumatized region, and it's not just Palestine, unfortunately. I mean, it's bad enough what's going on in Gaza and in the West Bank and all of Palestine. It also spills over into historic Palestine, into historic Sham, what we call the Sham, the entire region, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq. And we're fortunate today to have somebody whose roots are in Iraq and Lebanon. Mona, would you tell us a little bit about how this work came to you? What inspired you to write this book? I know you're into the creative field and you teach cinema and storytelling, but tell us a little bit more about this specific book.
Thank you. Well, I was really interested and moved to hear about your Maysa's experience of writing a Map For Falasteen, because there's a lot of resonance in terms of motherhood and realizing that to teach, the culture of the many cultures that we belong to, and the idea of home to my kids is one thing. To have to explain colonialism and why return is not something that comes to some, comes easily, returning to the place that our ancestors are from, that's another. And so similarly, it was 2023, the 20-year anniversary of the US-led invasion of Iraq, and it was really hitting me heavy that I would, when do I start this conversation with my children? When do I begin to explain to them what the country that, the USA, where we call home now, the way that it destroyed Iraq and really changed the conditions on the ground so that it's unrecognizable to our family at this point. So how to tell that story, when to do it. And so I wrote it as a poem to my children. I didn't actually write this with as for the purpose of writing a children's book. That came later through my conversations with my mentor, Santo Nagara, and my collaborator on my first children's book. the editor at Seven Stories Press, Dan Simon, and then it evolved into the book, which was illustrated very beautifully by Ishtar. But yeah, so it tells a story that is so personal, but also I have found resonates much more widely, unfortunately, as you said.
Tell us a little bit how this relates to your own background. And, were you born in this country and that sort of thing? I asked Maysa before.
Yeah, the diasporic journey. So I was born in the U.S. in Baltimore, and then my family eventually came to California and settled here. At one point, we did return to Lebanon, where part of my family's ancestry lies, where people have ended up in the region. But both my parents were both raised in Baghdad, and yeah, they grew up there, they met there, fell in love there, and they left under, during the 70s, under the conditions of the early stages of dictatorship in Iraq, which was a whole other story. My grandparents ended up leaving during the first Gulf War, very suddenly. This was in the early 90s, very suddenly under unfortunate conditions that had to do with health, their health conditions and the need for medical treatment. And again, left everything. Left on an airplane, left with a sense of some safety and had a place to come to live with my mother and her sisters in the U.S., but left everything. And so, we have very little materially from that part of our family history and family life. However, we have stories, we have letters, we have, it's the stories that remain.
Could you grace us with a few passages from your book?
Sure. I'm having a hard time thinking of exactly where to begin and end, so I think I'll read a little from the beginning and just maybe a few verses from the end. And I will just say that all the pictures in here are depicting, illustrations depict Iraq. Beautiful watercolor. So it begins, I want you to know that you come from a place and a people that are beautiful. I want you to know that our ancestors loved and laughed and danced and played and worked and cared for one another in this place. They call this place home. I want you to know that they were not perfect, your ancestors, because no one is. Yet they lived in dignity. And the book includes some beautiful spreads that have no words on them that also tell part of the story. And I want you to know that what made this place unsafe was greed. The greed of people from another place who already have more than they need. Those people who have so much and still want more, they made war. They made horrible, ugly, impossible war. I'm going to skip a little bit. War set ablaze the street our ancestors called home. It turned off the lights, made day into night, and so they left, like those who left before. All we have lost still burns inside of me, and it burns inside of you. I want you to know you do not carry it all alone. And from this fire, something beautiful can grow. However far away we are now, however many miles, however many years, I want you to know that you are still of the place our ancestors have known. The place that they called home.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you very much. One question that has intrigued me for a while, personally as an author myself, and as an Arab as well. I come from Algeria originally, and I grew up around, and I came here to Berkeley when I was 20 years old, so I really developed, my formative years were in Algeria, and I always noticed how people were full of stories, and they were good at telling these stories. My father used to, when we'd walk in the forest sometime, he would tell me something that happened, and then he would stop walking and squeeze my arm for punctuation. And came back to me much later saying, he's just a native, a born storyteller, and he wasn't the only one. So I asked this question of other Arabs from different countries, like people like Casey Kasem, you must have heard of. He was a very good storyteller. That's what made him famous. Is this something specific to Arabs or Middle Easterners in general? Where does this come from? So I would like to ask you two, who are storytellers, maybe born storytellers, what's your impression? Is there something specific to the either Arabic language or the Arab tradition that is really oriented towards storytelling? Let's start with either one of you. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I think definitely what's evident in Maysa's book, and I write the dedication of my book, it's dedicated to my children, Layal and Zayn, and the stories we carry, and our ancestors whose stories we carry in our hearts. And I do think that there is something, definitely in my personal family history, but so many of us from the region and who are in the diaspora, whether that's the diaspora within, within the region or beyond, that there's migration is just from generation to generation is such a part of our lived experience. And so the way that, which is that beautiful line in your book, like some people are in places and some places aren't the people. So that's how we keep those stories alive of people, of places, of memories. Like I haven't been to Baghdad since I went once when I was 3 years old. But I have really clear ideas of specific places where my parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles have told me stories about their childhood. And so that brings it alive. It becomes a place that I can carry in my heart, and then I can pass those stories. And so there's also something in the way that we can transfer that knowledge, that deeply personal knowledge and that lived knowledge through story that is, I think it is particular not to many people who are part of the Arab diaspora, but also any peoples who have experienced displacement, multiple migrations, for sure.
I remember on the radio show asking Don Bustani, who was Casey Kasem's partner, so he was also a very good storyteller, the same question. He had kind of, he'd given me an answer that I didn't expect. He said, well, look, and he was also Lebanese, so it's from that area. He said, I think all traditions, all cultures have this, so there's nothing special about us. And I wanted more. No, tell me something more interesting. There's these storytellers in the Middle East who are called hakawatis. This is what they do for a living. And I've asked you this question before on the radio, Maysa. Tell us a little bit about those people.
So the hakawatis, or the storytellers, as I understand it, that's a person who makes a living off of telling stories. And in Palestinian culture in particular, the type of story that a person tells depends on their gender. So the folklore, the telling of folk tales, is more women's domain, and the folk tales are carried on by the moms and the grandmas. And then the historical tales, or like the epics, are more for male tellers. There is kind of a divide. I grew up on my mother's folk tales and my great-grandmother's folk tales. And I love noticing motifs in our stories that can be found in folk tales around the world. And I'm sorry, but I agree with your friend. I don't think we're special in that.
No, that's fine.
It's what connects us to all of humanity.
I'm not so chauvinistic about it. I just wanted to hear both sides, because I think both are correct. Yeah, Arabs are good at trust, but so is everybody else too.
I think there's a certain, Arabs have a certain passion for their language and for poetry. And I mean, before Islam, there was an obsession with poetry inside. There were contests in the Kaaba. They had inside the Kaaba where people go now to perform pilgrimage. There were tapestries with poems hanging inside. It was a great honor to be a poet and to capture the attention of your audience just through spoken word.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and one last question. One thing I wanted to mention is that, and that's something we touched on before, is this, there seems to be now, maybe because of the evolution of the politics in the Middle East, there seems to be a new generation of publishers, editors who are perhaps more open to these stories, whereas before it was absolutely, we could be blacklisted for even trying.
Yeah, definitely.
Tell us a little bit your success story, and then we'll take questions from.
Okay, so when I first wrote this story, similar to Mona, I was just writing a story to explain something hard to my daughter, and I never thought it would be published or picked up, because the last time a Palestinian story was traditionally published by a major publisher, it had been, how long, 25 years, I want to say. These Secrets, 1991. Yes. And I knew from speaking to Palestinian writers, they would submit manuscripts, and agents or editors would ask them to change the identity of their protagonist. Can they be Egyptian instead? Can they be Lebanese instead? Which is something, it's mind-boggling to someone who's not Palestinian to hear that. Like the world we have to navigate, the different shades of racism, anti-Palestinian racism in every facet of life, and publishing is no exception. It's pretty incredible.
I find that very encouraging. I was very encouraged to hear what you said about the auctions and how several major publishers were really interested. That's not my experience, and I'm the previous generation, so I'm still living in that time, and I'm really happy to see that things are opening up. Finally.
It's definitely turning, yes.
So I think we will start taking questions from the audience. And anybody, I think, should they step up to the microphone here?
Ask a question, come on up here. Queue up on the side.
I have several questions, but they're short. How did you get your book illustrated, and for both of you? How did you get your book published? What year was it published, and how much does it cost?
I love a pragmatic question. I'll just say that, as I said, I didn't set out to write this as I'm writing a picture book. I wrote something that was very personal, a poem. I shared it with Santanagara, who is the author of Base for Activists and many other amazing books, who has been an important friend and mentor for me, and also was the illustrator for my debut picture book. And he said, well, I can't illustrate this one. You're gonna have to find someone who really shares this experience with you, and kind of pushed me to go on that journey. And so luckily I had the support of Triangle Square Books, which is part of the imprint from Seven Stories Press, which they are publishing radical, the things that many mainstream publishers won't take on. So I was very lucky to have their support, but I had to find an illustrator, and for me it was really a journey of not hearing a lot of responses back from the illustrators I would just sort of cold reach out to. But then I went through like the diasporic network to find a young illustrator who's actually based in Sweden, who had just finished her MFA, and it was like when we finally met, it was a perfect match. And she brought a visual story to life through the illustrations that says all the things that my words don't say, but are so much a part of the reason why I wanted it to be a picture book. So that was an amazing, fortunate experience, but it took patience. There were many moments where I said, well, this just isn't gonna happen. And then, when did it come out? It came out earlier this year, not long ago. I don't know about the financials personally, but I do know that it was a labor of love, and I'm really grateful to have it out in the world as a physical book you can hold in your hand. How much does the book cost? You don't think?
That
You
was
can
one of
answer
the
that
important
question
questions. We can
yourself.
find out later.
Eastwood Books.
Oh, yes, it's for sale. Eastwood Books is here, and it's for sale in the back, so.
Maysa.
So it was published by Macmillan, so I have no idea what it costs to publish a book and put it out in the world. But before it went to auction, I thought, I'm gonna have to do this by myself. I'm gonna find the illustrator. Normally, the author does not find the illustrator unless they're an artist themselves, they do the art. I found Alia Betawi online. She had an Instagram account with her beautiful art. And I wrote to her and I said, do you want to illustrate my book? And she said, yeah, I would love to. And this book was fully illustrated, just the two of us, a year going back and forth, FaceTiming each other. Before we even thought it would go this route, a friend of mine recommended to participate in a Twitter pitch where new authors would write a line about their book and pitch it, and agents and editors would have their eye on it, and they would reach out to you, perhaps. And we participated, but we had art. So I had a little line about my book, a spread that she had done, and the same day we spoke to our agent, the next day we signed, and the following week we went to auction. So that was the sequence of events for us. It was very unorthodox.
The social media fairy tale.
Yeah, social media fairy tale, go with that. The illustrator is a Palestinian based in Egypt. He's a Hardy.
I think that's so cool, the way that, because also I ended up looking at the Instagram profile of the illustrator, and she's based in Sweden, so I just think like this is so beautiful, like the moment that we live in, some of the advantages we have of being able to collaborate on projects transnationally through the diaspora. Because she's Iraqi and Swedish heritage, and we would have never met otherwise, but we were able to create this thing, and it sounds like a similar magic that happened.
It's kind of magical.
Any other questions? Please.
Assalamualaikum. First of all, amazing. It's so amazing to see our stories out there, your stories out there. And it's also amazing that you had such support from your publishers and, that community around you. But when you started writing, because it's not something that our community does, especially as Muslim women, I would say, we don't write books, we don't put out books. How was the reception within your own community, your friends, your family, and, maybe your places of worship that you go to?
I think, gosh, there are some amazing Muslim writers and Muslim women write incredible, incredible work. Perhaps we're not encouraged as immigrants to go into the arts as our primary career. Maybe that's what you're trying to express. Yes, I'm a pharmacist. Is that cool? I know. Just pretend I'm not. I didn't say that. So the reception I've received from my community has been very joyful and they've been in disbelief. How did you put this out? How is this in bookstores? Again, the racism that we experience as Palestinians from such a young age when we don't even know what racism is, when we don't even know what being Palestinian is absurd. So I had one event at a bookstore in Los Altos, and after I did this reading, a woman came up to me, a Palestinian woman, and she was like, "Who let you in here?" And I was like, "What do you mean? Should I not be here?" I looked around myself like, "What are you talking about?" She's like, "Do you know where you are?" I was like, "No, the manager invited me and I came." But there are places that are really, really unfriendly to Palestinians in California. Kids have been so proud to see the map and to point out their village, where they're from in the book for the first time, which is that's what I wanted, for them to see themselves embraced in the book, all parts of themselves, and also to know that, the mom in the earlier passage I read, she says, "Palestine lives in you and me." But the book also, if you read the rest of it, it's not just this theoretical place. It is a real place with real families. It's not in the past tense. And half of the people that live in this tiny strip of land are Palestinian. And they just want what everyone else wants, and that is to be safe with their families and to have basic human rights. Really. And I think it was hard for me when I first went to Palestine for the first time. I looked around and I was like, wow, there are really people here living their lives. It isn't just some imaginary place. It's very real. And what the main character keeps asking, how do I know it's there? I've never been there, I've never seen it. How do I know? That's how I felt growing up in the U.S. Because also mass media kind of erases us. We're some kind of footnote at the end of World War II, and now we're just supposed to pretend that we never existed, or that we are not a part of this world or something. So yeah, it's a very real place. And we're not going anywhere.
If I may just add to what you were saying, I think it's beyond racism. Racism, of course, we know what it means. In this case, it's an agenda to erase, period. It's very specific. When it comes to Palestine, it's a colonialist agenda, nothing less. As happened in other places, other continents, the first order of business is to erase what was there before. And that's what we're witnessing. It's not just, racism is horrible. I shouldn't say just racism. Racism is terrible. But in this case, it's specifically aimed at erasing the story which is why I was so happy to see people actually telling the story. It's very important to remember. Mona, did you want to add anything to?
No, I thought that was so perfectly stated. And I'll just say there's this incredible line in Maysa's book where Jiddu is answering Palestine's questions about why Palestine is not on the map, and he draws this incredible, you have to just look at, you have to buy the book, but you have to look inside and see this illustration. It's so beautiful. It's like he draws his own map of Palestine that names places, and it's so beautiful and alive, you know, and he says, your teacher needs teaching. And so I love that line. It's so good. It's so good. So true. And I was saying to you both, like, I love to buy the books that I want to see in my children's classrooms, like, and give them to the teachers in my life. And I think that that's really just back to your question, you know, I think it's so important. I think anyone here who has a story in their heart that they haven't seen represented, like, so many of the poets and so many of the storytellers and the picture book authors that I meet are like, that's not necessarily your day job, right? Like, that's something that's coming from your heart, and you put into the world, and you put into children's hands and families' hands and into classrooms. So yeah, just in terms of who is that community, who are we telling these stories for? It's very personal for our children, but it's also for other people's children. It's for everybody. It's for the teachers, whether you're a parent or grandparent or whoever you are reading with children. I just wanted to add that.
Yes, and to quote again, the quote that you liked during our interview on the radio, the famous Russian Jewish painter, Marcel Chagall, said it, I think both, he said it best, and this, I think this applies to both of your books. He said, if you want to paint something universal, paint your village. Paint your own village. I think you both have done that very successfully. We had one more question, I think. Yes, thank you. This will be the last question.
I was wondering if you could talk about bilingualism or multilingualism in storytelling, if there are certain stories that have come out that you've learned through one language that you wouldn't have through another, or things that you learned in the process of making this book through having conversations in one language and not the other.
He was talking about bilingualism.
Bilingualism? The microphone was not. If you could speak a little louder. There's a hum that kind of moves.
There's a fan over there.
Thank you. If you could just speak to bilingualism and multilingualism and how it relates to storytelling, if you've learned certain things, if you've learned certain stories through one language and not another, or in making this book, were surprised or learned something new in one language that maybe you wouldn't have in another. So just kind of curious if you could talk about that relationship.
It's an interesting question about how the linguistic angle works out in these stories. You may have heard the story in Arabic, now you're telling it in English. What kind of...
Well, I'll say as a reader, I'm very affected by and influenced. I'm heartened to see the number of books, not only coming from Arab diaspora or Arab writers, but in many different language cultures, where it's like the third culture is being represented, because it's really like a fusing of, bringing in the language from our heritage into our storytelling. I don't do that very much in this book, but you certainly do, right? Bringing in the words, the names, the way that we refer to each other affectionately, into the storytelling without having to translate it. It's just part of how we mix language, and we can actually really communicate with each other in the world. And seeing the prevalence of that, I've seen that in Kathy Camper's book, which is amazing, The 10 Ways to Hear Snow, and many others. And I've seen that in a lot of books by Indigenous authors in North America too. So I'm very heartened to see that that's a new norm even in mainstream publishing more so.
I utilized Arabic in my book. Well, most obvious is Palestine. So if you don't know, Palestine is just the Arabic word for Palestine. It's also the name of the main character. And I did that intentionally. You know, a lot of Palestinian girls are named after the villages that they came from, like Yafa, Haifa, Bisan. I know 3 girls named Palestine. And the terms of endearment that her grandma and her grandpa and her mom used to refer to her, it's like when they say, Ya Umri, like my life, my soul, my Ya Ruhi, Ya Qalbi, my heart. They're showing their love for their child, at the same time their love for their homeland, for Palestine. I think, you know, Palestinians are known for having a lot of love for the land they come from, but I think what defines us even better is our love for our children. And
What you were just saying reminded me of another interview that I had recently with this Arab Jew, an Algerian Jewish Israeli, who wrote a fantastic book about her family's history in Algeria, Jews who had been there from time immemorial, before even Islam reached Algeria. And she reclaims her roots in Algeria. And she happened to have been born in 1962 when Algeria became independent from France. It became a reality. And she told her father, Daddy, why didn't you call me Algeria? Duh. Algeria was born in 62, I was born in 62. So these stories of erasure, of purposely trying to massage a reality into something that isn't, is familiar to not just Palestine, Algeria, Lebanon, Iraq. This country certainly is a big sort of taboo. You know, I've been here in Berkeley almost 30 years. My niece went through the K through 12 system. Hardly a word about the original natives of this country. Hardly a word. Holocaust, very, very important because other people did it somewhere in Europe. But what we did here in this country, not important. They're completely erased. So there's a new attempt to do the same in other places like Palestine as we speak. And it won't happen, it won't work. It's just terrible that it has to cause so much suffering. And we're witnesses to that today. Any last word just to finish on something more positive?
Free Palestine.
Free Palestine.